Hi, this is Ken Salvail from GrowerCoach.com. Today we're looking at soils, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown of what soils are all about. When you see we have some plants here growing on this soil surface, and down below is the soil itself. And we have to understand what the soil is made up of. And soil is just basically a few things. It's just basically sand, silt, and clay. And OM, organic matter. That's basically what it's made up of. There's also other things which are microbes. Microbes are actually one of the key most important things in plant health, is to have a very nice wide variety of microbes and living organisms in the soil. Everything from fungus to bacteria to mycoplasmas, all kind of different organisms that live in the soil, and they all help to keep most of them help to keep the plants healthy. Some of them are detrimental to the plants, but the majority are good. But just with the soil itself, we've got sand, silt, and clay and organic matter. So with sand, you've got fairly large particles, and they're basically minerals. So these are all minerals. Sand, silt, and clay are all minerals. The main difference between them is their particle sizes, right? Sand is fairly big, and silt is quite small, and it has many little spaces, or not quite as many spaces as what you would think as far as silt goes. It's pretty fine, it's kind of dusty. Clay, on the other hand, is almost a solid mass. So it has very, very little air or oxygen in it. And so often when you see clay, if you dig up some clay, you'll see it's blue in color. And often things that are blue are deficient in oxygen. It's kind of telling you that there's not much air in there. Well, the thing with plants is that the majority of plants, they bring in a lot of oxygen through the root systems. They have to have oxygen because the leaves are feeding carbohydrates down into the roots to keep the roots alive, and the roots have to oxidize that carbohydrate to convert it into energy. So if there's no oxygen to oxidize with, the roots die. So that's where there are some specialized plants that will live in clay soils where there's very low oxygen. They've learned to adapt, but it's not the norm. Most plants like to see this sort of a combination. Organic matter is almost like the glue. It's also very solid, and it's a mass of extremely small particles. And this is actually the size is large, medium, small, but really super small, and extremely small. So organic matter is even smaller, but it's like the glue that glues the particles together. So this is all real important stuff for the plants. And if you mix them together where you get sort of a nice blend, they call it loamy soil. So there's sandy and there's silty soils and clay soils, but if you start mixing them together, you get loam. And if the color of the soil tends to be a little bit darker in color, it indicates a higher percentage of organic matter. In dry climates and desert climates, you'll find that you'll have a very low percentage of organic matter. It can be sometimes as low as less than 1% organic matter in your soil condition. But in other areas where there's a lot more leafy material, a lot more plant material, so rainier climates, you'll find that organic percentage will go up quite high. But on average, most plants really don't need that much, they just need some. So what they need is about that, maybe a 15% is a beautiful amount, even 10%, I'm going to say 10 to 15% is quite a bit of organic matter to have in soil. It's not something that you really see that high in nature that often, but you know, vegetable gardens, you can get it up to this 15-20% or so. But for most plants, 10% is a nice blend, so if you're mixing in organic matter into your soils, it's really nice. And you do it in the form of compost, and the compost will break down and it'll form a product that's called humus. And humus is really that really black, slimy product, but it actually acts like glue and glues the particles together so that it forms little beads. And soils that have beads in them, like if you ever go to the garden and you pick up that soil and it's full of little beads, that's called friable soil. And that's actually the clay and the organic matter working together. Their particles are so small, like a clay particle, you need an electron microscope to see it. That's how small it is. So they're so tiny that they actually they hold an electrical charge, typically a negative charge. Same with organic matter. So what happens is when there's calcium and magnesium and different positively charged particles nearby, they tend to attract and glue together. And that garden soil, when you pick that up and those little beads come down, that's beautiful soil. That's exactly what you want. But those little beads of soil that come off, they're actually glued together by an electronic charge. It's not a sticky factor, it's an electrical factor. It's positive and negative bringing those together. So that's a real important factor. Even if you have poor soils or poor clay soils, if you blend in some organic matter and even a little bit of other minerals in there, it'll actually all start to glue itself together and the clay will break up and become little beads. People will often use gypsum. They can buy the pelletized gypsum and mix it into clay soils, and it helps to break it up. Because gypsum is calcium sulfate and it has a lot of the positively charged ions in there, so that it really does create this nice electrical combination. But that's basically it. When you have soils that are sandy, you get a lot more of these little air spaces in between those particles, and that's perfect for roots. It's perfect for water, because water has a place to hang out in those little pore spaces. When you have solid clay, there's not much room for water to hang out, even though it feels moist. There's no oxygen in there, and that water doesn't want to let go. So that's the basics of soil today. It's basically the sand, silt, and clay is your minerals, and the organic matter is any kind of compost that's broken down. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to GrowerCoach.com.